Ukraine's skies are under attack. Missiles keep raining down, defenses are stretched thin, but Europe has a plan, and Russia won't like it. 120 fighter jets, non-stop patrols, a direct challenge to Moscow's air dominance. Sky Shield is coming. But who's really behind it? What's the catch? And will it actually stop Russia's air war? Let's break it down. Sky Shield is a plan to protect Ukraine's skies from Russian airstrikes. However, this plan isn't coming from NATO, although NATO allies are coordinating it. And as sure as anything, it's not coming from the US. It's Europe stepping in to defend Ukraine. The plan calls for 120 fighter jets to patrol the skies over Kyiv and other key cities. These jets will form an integrated air protection zone, a shield against Russia's missiles, drones and bombs, stopping them before they can reach Ukrainian civilians. This plan is tied to something Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky recently proposed, a truce in the sky. It's a push to stop attacks on civilian infrastructure, like power grids and hospitals, by banning missiles, long-range drones, and bombs. Sky Shield could be the first step in making that truce a reality, a concrete action, not just a political wish. But who is behind this action? The Sky Shield plan was drafted by a group of military experts, including former planners from the UK's Royal Air Force, who worked alongside Ukraine's armed forces. The plan was discussed in European defense circles, though it's clear not everyone is eager to take the leap. Some of Europe's leaders have been hesitant to sanction patrols of Ukraine's skies while the war rages on. But those behind Sky Shield believe it's not just necessary, it's urgent. And they're right, the urgency of Sky Shield truly can't be overstated. After a brief suspension, the United States has resumed military aid and intelligence support to Ukraine following recent ceasefire discussions. However, with US assistance previously in flux and NATO's cohesion under strain, European nations find themselves at the forefront of defense. This precarious situation leaves Ukraine in urgent need of bolstering its military capabilities. The pressing nature of Russia's ambitions further intensifies this urgency. Classified US intelligence has recently shown that Russian President Vladimir Putin remains relentless in his pursuit of Ukraine, and his goals haven't shifted, even with all the talks of a ceasefire. As one report put it, Putin is still determined to hold sway over Kyiv, a direct threat to Ukraine's sovereignty. With no sign of Russia backing down, Ukraine's need for protection has never been more critical. But let's be honest, Europe has waited far too long. For years it relied heavily on the US for security, and the fallout from that complacency is now painfully clear. Sir Richard Shirreff, former Deputy Supreme Allied Commander Europe, put it bluntly: Europe has been freeloading off American support, and that long-standing reliance on the US has left the continent ill-prepared for a crisis of this magnitude. But better late than never, right? Though Sky Shield will function separately from NATO, it will be executed by a coalition of willing NATO members. Emphasis on the willing. The plan doesn't require formal NATO command, but it will certainly rely on NATO's intelligence, infrastructure, and coordination. Plus, the execution will need to align closely with other programs already in place to support Ukraine. But the weight of Sky Shield isn't just in its strategy, it's also in the names backing it. Over 70 influential figures from across the globe have put their support behind this effort. Diplomats, former ambassadors, military generals, ex-political leaders, and the list goes on. Names like Adam Kinzinger, a former US congressman and lieutenant colonel in the Air National Guard, and Philip Breedlove, former NATO Supreme Allied Commander, bring unmatched experience and authority to this plan. Their credibility alone amplifies the importance of Sky Shield. The coalition behind Sky Shield also includes voices from Canada, France, the UK, and across Europe, each one adding their expertise and commitment to the cause. Their signatures are more than just marks on a page, they're a statement, a declaration that Europe is ready to defend Ukraine and will not stand idly by as Russia continues its assault. But how exactly will this defense function? Let's get into the nitty-gritty. First up, the aircraft. We've already mentioned that Sky Shield would require 120 jets, but let's take a closer look at these powerful machines and their purpose. The aircraft at the core of Sky Shield will be a mix of US-made F-16s and F-16AMs and BMs, as well as other high-performance jets like the American F-35, the French Mirage, Eurofighter Typhoon, and the Swedish Gripen. These planes will be stationed at European bases, always on the ready. However, they won't be just sitting on the tarmac. They'll be in the air, constantly patrolling, scanning, and intercepting anything that threatens Ukrainian skies. Whether it's a missile, a drone, or a bomb, they'll be there, ready to stop it dead in its tracks. And it's not just the fighter jets alone. Specialized assets will be deployed to back them up. you'll have the AEW&C, Airborne Early Warning and Control aircraft, tankers, ISR, Intelligence, Surveillance and Reconnaissance Systems, electronic warfare, cyber defense units, and more. Thanks to a wide array of military equipment, the coalition will be able to adapt to whatever threat Russia might send. Together, this mighty fleet will create a true shield in the sky, unlike anything we've seen so far. But where will this shield be positioned? In other words, which part of Ukraine will be patrolled by those 120 jets? Sky Shield aircraft will operate solely over friendly territory, closely coordinating with Ukrainian armed forces. Their efforts are mainly focused on critical infrastructure, vital cities, and areas that impact Ukraine's future. The plan includes full protection for Ukraine's 3 active power plants, Rivne, Khmelnytsky, and South Ukrainian. These plants are now responsible for around 70% of Ukraine's electricity supply, making their protection a matter of survival. A successful attack on them could push Ukraine into a total blackout, leaving millions without power, water, or heat. Unfortunately, Russia's strategy has been chillingly effective in targeting Ukraine's energy sector so far. Over 1,000 attacks on the grid have occurred since the war began, with attacks on substations forcing power plants, including nuclear reactors, to shut down or reduce output. In November 2024, 4 substations were hit, triggering the shutdown of 1 reactor at the Rivne plant. This tactic mirrors Russia's earlier playbook at Zaporizhzhia, where similar attacks on surrounding substations led to power loss and ultimately forced the plant's closure. But Russia's approach isn't just about causing damage, it's also about creating fear. Striking these plants directly would risk catastrophic radiation leaks, so instead Russia targets the weak link, the substations. By disrupting the electricity flow, Russia increases the chances of a dangerous shutdown, and if things get too unstable, the International Atomic Energy Agency may step in, as it did with Zaporizhzhia, and force Ukraine to shut down the plant to avoid further risk. And Russia isn't relenting. In 2024 alone, Russia launched at least 12 major strikes on Ukraine's energy grid, firing over 1,100 missiles at critical infrastructure. 2 times disaster was only narrowly averted, and a Chernobyl-like incident was stopped only through sheer heroism from ground teams. That's why these plants must be protected at all costs. The same goes for cities like Odessa and Lviv, 2 major urban centers vital to Ukraine's resistance. Since the beginning of the invasion, these cities have been mercilessly targeted by Russian forces, each time with devastating consequences. Odessa, a key port city on the Black Sea, has seen brutal strikes that have shattered both its infrastructure and civilian lives. The first airstrike on February 24, 2022 resulted in the deaths of at least 22 servicemen. Russian warships stationed offshore fired missiles at Odessa, with cruise missiles being intercepted by Ukraine's defenses, but not without damage. On April 23, 2022, Russian missiles hit a military facility and 2 residential buildings, killing 8 civilians and injuring many more. On June 30, 2022, a missile strike destroyed an apartment building and recreational center in Sahivka, killing at least 21 and injuring more than 38. The cost of these attacks in human lives and infrastructure continues to rise. The Russian military has shown no mercy, targeting civilian buildings, airports, and energy infrastructure. One of the most tragic attacks came in March 2024 when a Russian drone strike destroyed a residential building, killing 12, including 5 children. The attack also targeted Odessa's cultural landmarks, even damaging UNESCO-listed sites. That's the ruthless nature of Russia's invasion. Lviv, a strategic cultural and military hub in western Ukraine, has faced similar destruction. On March 13, 2022, Russian forces launched a massive missile attack on the Yavoriv military base, killing 35 and injuring over 130 people. Lviv's civilians haven't been spared either. In April 2022, 4 cruise missiles hit military infrastructure, killing 7 people and injuring 11, including a child. The attack on October 10, 2022 was one of the largest, leaving much of Lviv without electricity and water. By the end of 2022, Lviv's energy infrastructure had been repeatedly targeted, with missiles damaging vital facilities and leaving thousands without power. The city was subjected to intense shelling throughout 2023, with civilian casualties mounting. In one particularly brutal attack on July 6, 2023, at least 10 people were killed in a missile strike on an apartment building. The relentless bombardment and destruction of these 2 cities explains why they're singled out when talking about Sky Shield. However, the Integrated Air Protection Zone won't cover the heart of Ukraine's battle, the front line. That's where the line is drawn, and we'll explain why later on. The east of Ukraine, including places like Donetsk Oblast, will remain exposed. The Ukrainian military, already stretched thin, must continue to defend these areas with their own resources. Sky Shield can't be everywhere, but it will protect the most vulnerable parts of Ukraine, giving its people a chance to hold on. But this is only one impact of Sky Shield, protecting the people of Ukraine. If this initiative is carried out as intended, it will have groundbreaking military, political, and socio-economic consequences. Let's break them all down. First and foremost, this initiative aims to free up critical resources, allowing the Ukrainian armed forces to focus their efforts on the front lines of eastern Ukraine, where the fiercest battles rage. The front lines can't be covered by Sky Shield. Then there's the human element. Sky Shield allows Ukrainian Air Force personnel to train safely within their own borders rather than being sent abroad for instruction. This ensures that their skills remain sharp, and more importantly, it strengthens the Air Force for the long term. In other words, Sky Shield isn't just a quick fix, it's about creating a capable, battle-hardened force ready to take on Russia, not just today, but for years to come. Of course, stopping Russia today still remains the priority, and Sky Shield could do just that. The system significantly hinders Russia's ability to launch missile and drone attacks. When you consider the potential of 120 European aircraft mobilized to protect Ukraine, you should understand why some military strategists believe this initiative could do more to protect Ukraine than a deployment of 10,000 European ground troops. Beyond military strategy, Sky Shield will also have a strong political impact. It will become a symbol of Europe's strength and unity. This initiative sends a message loud and clear: Europe can and will defend its own. And this should do wonders for the Ukrainian morale. The Ukrainian people, battered by years of conflict, will know that they have not just Ukraine's soldiers but Europe itself standing with them. This knowledge has the potential to shift the balance on the front line, increasing the pressure on Russia while positioning Ukraine more powerfully at the negotiating table when talks begin. The economic impacts of Sky Shield are equally significant. Those 120 jets will safeguard Ukraine's vital export corridors and increase investor confidence in the nation's industry. This makes Sky Shield a much-needed helping hand for Ukraine's economy. In addition, as attacks on critical infrastructure decrease, the likelihood of refugees returning to Ukraine increases, boosting both the economy and the morale of the entire nation. With 3.7 million Ukrainians internally displaced and 6.9 million of them fleeing abroad, this sense of security should encourage people to rebuild their lives at home. Sky Shield will do much more than just bolster Europe's defenses. It could transform Ukraine's long-term security, and with US aid resuming but still uncertain for the future, European leaders see this initiative as a way to ensure Ukraine stands strong long after the war ends. If they play their cards right, Sky Shield won't just fill gaps, it could redefine Europe's military independence. When you put it like that, it almost makes you wonder how the European leaders haven't thought of Sky Shield earlier. Well, they did actually. The idea behind this initiative isn't exactly new. Variants of the Sky Shield proposal have been tossed around since the very beginning of the invasion in February 2022. However, despite its obvious potential, the plan struggled to gain real momentum. But following Zelensky's tense meeting with US President Donald Trump, discussions have started once again, and accelerated at that, and the European media is starting to rally behind this idea once again. However, it's not just the media backing this initiative. High-profile figures from both military and political circles are adding their voices to the cause, some of which have also served as signatories. We've already mentioned two, Breedlove and Shiref. Shiref in particular has been vocal about the need for Sky Shield. He called Sky Shield a very interesting proposal that deserves wide support. Shiref believes that besides supporting Ukraine militarily, Sky Shield would also send a powerful signal to Russia that Europe is properly supporting Ukraine. However, Shiref also added Trump to the mix, seeing Sky Shield as a challenge to the US president's diplomatic approach. While Trump is cozying up to a dictator, Europe is actually making a change. Gabrielius Landsbergis, a former Lithuanian foreign minister, is another vocal advocate, highlighting how Sky Shield will be a critical part of Europe's commitment to Ukraine. According to him, the initiative would effectively and efficiently guarantee Ukraine's security, a promise that is increasingly vital as the conflict drags on. Still, all the support hasn't drowned out the concerns that kept the initial versions of Sky Shield from being implemented. The cause of these concerns is no great mystery. It's the same thing that kept Ukrainian allies from supporting the invaded country earlier, from allowing it to use long-range weapons earlier, and from truly doing all in their powers to defend Ukraine. It's the fear of escalation with Russia, the country with the largest nuclear arsenal in the world with 5,580 weapons in stock. European leaders worry that deploying fighter jets from NATO member states into Ukrainian airspace could lead to direct conflict with Russian forces, potentially triggering a deadly escalation. And this is a valid concern. After all, Russia sees NATO as its #1 enemy, and no one wants to push the Kremlin too far. But here's the thing, while these fears are understandable, they don't necessarily hold up under scrutiny. In fact, proponents of Sky Shield argue that the risk to the pilots is remarkably low. Why? Because since early 2022, Russia has been surprisingly cautious about engaging NATO aircraft. Essentially, the Russian Air Force has not ventured beyond the front lines. And now the borders of the Integrated Air Protection Zone start to make more sense. The current plan for Sky Shield maintains a distance of more than 125 miles between NATO aircraft and Russian jets. So while the presence of NATO planes in Ukrainian airspace would certainly irk Moscow, it's not the kind of action that would drive Russia into a full-blown military confrontation. Russia's red lines, contrary to the constant fear-mongering about nuclear escalation, are far more specific. First, there's the issue of land invasions. A significant military threat to the Russian heartland, such as a massive land invasion into its central economic region, would be seen as an existential threat, a red line that could provoke severe military retaliation. However, Sky Shield doesn't touch this sensitive area. It's an air defense system designed to protect Ukraine's airspace, not launch an offensive into Russian territory. Even when Ukrainian forces launched a relatively small-scale offensive into Russia's Kursk region with roughly 1,000 troops, Moscow didn't escalate the conflict beyond the use of North Korean soldiers. This highlights Russia's reluctance to engage in open conflict with NATO, a conflict Russia also can't afford to escalate. The second red line Russia has been vocal about is the personal safety of its leadership. Any serious attempt on the life of President Putin or his inner circle could result in extreme retaliation. However, Sky Shield poses no threat to the Russian leadership. The operation is not about striking at Russia's government or military bases. It's about protecting Ukraine's civilian population and infrastructure from Russian missiles and drone attacks. It's a defensive measure, not an offensive one. Finally, there's the fear of a preemptive nuclear strike. This is a threat that exists purely in the realm of theory and is unlikely to be triggered by Sky Shield. The deployment of European aircraft in Ukrainian airspace isn't an existential threat to Russia's survival, and thus it doesn't meet the criteria for a nuclear escalation. Russia's military is, of course, fully capable of responding with hybrid tactics, cyber attacks, propaganda, and low-level military skirmishes, but these are unlikely to shift the balance of power. Plus, the European coalition has the technological edge to defend against these tactics and mitigate their impact. So what's the bottom line? Sky Shield isn't going to send Europe hurtling toward a nuclear conflict with Russia. It's a carefully designed plan, grounded in international law and backed by solid military strategy. It can significantly improve Ukraine's defense capabilities without directly threatening Russia's red lines. And let's be honest, there's simply no viable alternative at this point. While additional surface-to-air missile systems could help, they're no match for the comprehensive protection that Sky Shield offers. The Ukrainian Air Force has shown incredible bravery and skill, but without the resources and infrastructure, it can't effectively protect its airspace on its own. So Sky Shield is the best shot Europe's got to protect Ukraine and weaken Russia's hold over its sovereign territory. Failing to act would only embolden Russia and lead to more destruction in the country. Currently, Russia's military power in Ukraine rests on three pillars. Number 1, infantry attacks with mechanized support. Russia has used these relentless attacks to push forward and claim territory. They're often the first wave in a larger offensive, overwhelming Ukrainian defenses with sheer numbers. The key here is the protection of Ukraine's airspace, which Sky Shield offers in abundance. With a dedicated air defense system in place, Ukraine can focus its resources more effectively. The Ukrainian Air Force, now relieved of some of the pressure from airstrikes, can reallocate its assets to the eastern front. This allows for greater protection of major cities like Kharkiv, Dnipro, Zaporizhia, and Kryvyi Rih. Number 2, glide bombs. Russia's use of glide bombs to break down Ukrainian defenses and clear a path for their infantry is a significant tactical advantage. These bombs are launched from aircraft, giving Russia the ability to strike from a distance and making it harder for Ukraine to intercept or defend against them. However, Sky Shield has the potential to put an end to this. With the advanced air protection capabilities provided by Sky Shield, Ukrainian forces will be in a better position to target and destroy Russian bombers and aircraft before they can release their deadly payloads. This would make these kind of bomb attacks less frequent and less effective. And number 3, attritional drone and missile attacks. This is what Sky Shield is all about, preventing the strikes meant to break the morale of the Ukrainian population and disrupt critical infrastructure. These strikes often target civilian areas, electrical grids, and other critical infrastructure deep inside Ukrainian territory, leading to widespread suffering and displacement. Currently, Ukrainian air defense systems like the Patriot interceptors are doing what they can, but they are limited by resources and ongoing supply chain issues. With the protection provided by Sky Shield, Ukraine could devote more of its existing air defense resources to other critical areas, while fighter patrols from European forces could intercept incoming Russian attacks. With fewer missiles and drones getting through, Russia's strategy of attrition instantly becomes far less effective. In short, Sky Shield would turn Ukraine into a fortress, and that could change everything. But will Sky Shield even get a chance to do this? That's the big question, and we direct this question to you. Is Sky Shield the workable, effective political and legal solution its proponents frame it as? Or is it just another ambitious plan that will stall in the face of political hesitation and fear of escalation? Share your thoughts in the comments section below.